Well, maybe that's the thing to focus on here for a minute, is that you have a population and a civilization and an environment that is really the antithesis of the United States in a variety of ways, technologically speaking, et cetera, which creates some real problems for the military as far as trying to wage a war there. Maybe the best place to start trying to understand kind of some of the problems that the United States has is by looking at the problems that the Soviets had in 1979 when they invaded Afghanistan. What were some of the difficulties that they ran into there? I mean, one of the nicknames of that war was the Soviets' Vietnam. At least that's what the United States called it. What happened to them there?
Well, like I said earlier about the mountain fighting, is that it really limits, like it did in our Vietnam, our technology, our ability to use a combined arms attack with artillery, with the bombs, with air support, and it all supports. And of course, one of our major arms is our artillery and our tanks. Well, they're pretty much rendered useless in this kind of environment, and it becomes guys going out and searching for people, and it's extremely difficult. And I think one of the other things that hampers Russia is, what is their military objective? I think that's where the comparison is in Vietnam. When we got involved in Vietnam, we were not trying to conquer North Vietnam. We weren't trying to conquer. There was no line in the sand that we were supposed to reach and secure. We were trying to prevent a communist takeover, for good or bad. How do you do that? We did it with search and destroy missions. It wasn't very effective. These guys retreated into the jungles. It was difficult to find them. And every time we had a fixed battle, we would take a hill. Tremendous casualties, both sides. Then the Americans would leave. The same thing happens in Russia. They go into a mountainous region. They're looking for the bad guys, so to speak. They engage them, they fight them, then they leave. 2 weeks later, you're attacking the same area. One of the things I worry about with Afghanistan is, what is our goal? It's not nation building. President Bush, when we initially went to war, had mentioned Al-Qaeda, and of course the Taliban were the protectors of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But soon after that, he expands the war to the war on terror. And it includes not only Afghanistan, and it includes Iran, it includes North Korea. He expanded it. I think what President Obama is trying to do now is to narrow the focus again. And that our goal is to not only take out Al-Qaeda, find the guys who attacked us, but secondarily, give Afghanistan enough support where they can end this history of constant upheaval. It's going to be difficult, especially when the enemy, from all reports, when confronted by American forces, will go into Pakistan. Well, we can't very well follow them into Pakistan, and so it's really going to take an effort by both our countries if we're going to stop this. And then, of course, with the whole concept of terrorism, and you brought up the point of collateral damage, a lot of people want to classify everyone as a terrorist. Well, that's a very loose term, because they have a variety of reasons why they're fighting against the United States. Many of the people in Afghanistan are fighting against us because they see us as an occupier, not necessarily as some kind of religious motive or something like that.
Real quick, I just heard on the radio yesterday on NPR that the ground force fellow who would be fighting for the Taliban, that individual makes more money than a Kabul police officer does, for instance. So this isn't something ideological for them. It's just a matter of, well, I need to pay for food or clothing or whatever it is that I might want. So that's something to consider as well. I think you were kind of describing Vietnamization. We're trying to get them to hold on to whatever. We had something like that in Iraq, the Iraqification, I think they called it. I don't know if you have that for this country. If you think about the surge for just a moment, President Obama's putting in 30,000 troops. They're mostly going to go into Helmand and Kandahar provinces in the south. This is mainly because of the drug trade that's going on there. and opium, illicit heroin, and other things coming out of there. This is the 90% of the illegal drugs in heroin and opium on the world market is coming from here. And so we had NATO forces there, the Canadians and the British in that area, but not in sufficient enough numbers to keep this down. There's not a viable economy right now for this country, which would then lead to, of course, the processing of this heroin and opium poppies. So I don't know how you develop an economy. I don't know how I mean, you're trying. You want to make it stable enough. But with this surge, there's a lot of other things. I'm sorry to take too much time, but the surge that went on in Iraq had a lot of other things associated with it. It wasn't just the fact that we put soldiers in there and that did the trick. There was lots of money, back dealings, agreements, a whole host of things going on. And I wonder if all we're doing is going to shut down the main part of their economy, which is opium processing, what else is there? Do we have an infusion? Do we make it safe for non-governmental organizations? Can oil companies come in and develop the oil reserves that they have? You know, is it possible to have this a viable economy, or is this going to continue to be a failed state? That remains to be seen.
Right. Well, it does raise the question of, I mean, even though President Obama has said that this is not nation building, you still have to have a central government. You have to have something that is able to maintain order, that is able to maintain the law, and yet the opium poppy is a huge wrench in that theory in a lot of ways. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but as we were discussing this, looked at some charts earlier this week where, you know, I guess it was in 2001 or 2004, the opium poppy numbers dropped way down. Right. And then they have skyrocketed over the last several years, and in fact higher to levels that were above
heretofore unattained.
Exactly, bigger than pre-war levels. Yes. So if that clearly is the major thing, the major crop, the major cash giver, how do you build a central government when the thing that you're doing, the thing that brings in all these people money, is illegal and we're trying to stop it? How do you have a central government? Those are conflicting ideals, are they not?
Yeah. And if you look back, I reviewed a lot of information about the history of Afghanistan for our talk today, and what you find is that they have been in a state of war, assassinations, since 1728. And so we're going back in time to where they've had difficulties. What we're trying to do with them now, they don't have the history that we had to fall back on. Like in the American Revolution, we created a government, believe it or not, that was very much like Great Britain, because that was what we had a tradition of doing. They really lack a centralized kind of government. They've attempted it several times. They've had a monarchy, they've had a president, they've gone back and forth, they had a communist takeover, they had several of these things. And it's difficult for us to now go in there and just impose, oh, you guys need democracy, and this will work for you, because a lot of them don't have that tradition. And it's difficult to impose this on a culture that doesn't have a long-standing tradition of this kind of government.
Real quick, one of the traditions that they do have is the Loya Jirgas. It's a grand council, and that they have the head of the tribe, you know, certain tribe or clan, depending on where they are. All these headmen come in and have a discussion about what's going on. Sometimes it's just cultural. Sometimes it may be a shura, which is a consultative assembly, which might bring in aspects of the Quran. Maybe Sharia law, but this is something that they've had for quite a long period of time. Maybe a king ruling over a certain area, but the conflicts that you mentioned stretch all the way back to Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan coming through here. You think it's an out-of-the-way, tucked-away place in the world, but it used to be in the middle of the route between Europe and China and trade. But the real problem of what we deal with now is a very corrupt government in Hamid Karzai. He's the only guy, he's the only horse in the race now. And from the reports that his brother is somehow tied into the drug trade in the south of the country, what are you to do? You know, can you create somebody else? I mean, if you mention Vietnam and know them the end, and you don't have anyone that you can really work with here. So the CIA allows him to be assassinated. I mean, I don't know what our next step is, but you really don't have the best cards in the deck when you're trying to create this country again.